بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكرك الغافلون. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Today's live stream is of extreme importance. It is what we would refer to as a point of a major paradigm shift, how we may view the world relating to the Epstein files and the videos and documents that were released by the United States government. Of course, the documents are redacted. Many names have been removed. It's an issue of controversy. But today, I wanted to take you down the rabbit hole and the nexus of interconnecting lines. Of course, this issue has exposed that which many people have in the past said is something theoretical and unprovable. But now it becomes very obvious and self-evident that there is a globalist elite that intends to sabotage freedoms and humankind, and that globalist elite is Zionist in nature. And Epstein represented just a facet of that globalist elite. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, aka Shaitan, he tweeted with regard to Jeffrey Epstein by saying, and of course this is the father of lies, he writes in his tweet that Jeffrey Epstein's unusual close relationship with Ehud Barak doesn't suggest Epstein worked for Israel. It proves the opposite. Now, this is, of course, Benjamin attempting to avoid the important question with regard to Epstein's relationship with the occupying Zionist Jewish supremacists that occupy Palestine today and cause fasad in the earth, corruption in the earth. Firstly, Ehud Barak is one of your prime ministers, one of your former prime ministers from, I think, the year 1999 to the year 2001. The year 2000 being the year when the second intifada started. Of course, the first intifada in 1987. But Benjamin Netanyahu is attempting to distance himself and distance Israel, what they refer to as Israel, away from the Epstein exposure, what has been uncovered. Now, of course, here in Britain, there has been coverage regarding Peter Mandelson and the former Prince Andrew. But there is an intricate link between what is known as Israel or Zionism or Jewish supremacism, and now some of these rag newspapers like the Jewish Chronicles and other rag Zionist newspapers are attempting to label Jewish supremacism as a conspiracy theory. So if you point out the war crimes of the IDF, the war crimes of the Knesset, the war crimes of what is known as Israel, and you point out the fact that Israel in its nature is Jewish supremacism, similar to Nazism, that is being labeled as a conspiracy theory conveniently. Well, gone are the days when conspiracy theory could be an epithet applied to a person to malign him, to discredit him, because the Epstein files really expose the underbelly, the inner workings, the chicanery, and the quagmire of the Zionist machine and how it functions. It exposes the labyrinth and the deep tunnels and the workings of a very detailed system, a system that works to undermine freedoms of all the peoples across the world, to the point that Jeffrey Epstein even attempted to contact President Putin. Of course, why would he attempt to contact Putin? It's in order to have leverage over world leaders. This leverage was done through human trafficking, by recording people in power and people in high positions, whether in academia or political high positions, in compromising situations where they were lured and made to have, or of course they are willingly doing this and they are guilty of it, of having intimate, abusive relationships out of the boundary of law and out of the boundary of any deen, any religion. So, firstly, this scandal started, there is a timeline when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in 2005. The charges, they started in 2005. But this individual, Jeffrey Epstein, and of course, like the British media and this politician Rupert, an MP, made a mention of Pakistani grooming gangs, and the media has been geared into mentioning Pakistani grooming gangs, and rightly so. Any grooming gang, of course, those who are convicted of paedophilia, in reality the death penalty should be brought back to the UK to carry out the capital punishment on paedophiles, whether they are Pakistani or whether they are black or white or any ethnic group. But there are also Jewish paedophile grooming gangs. And of course, what is referred to as the right wing, or we would say English people complaining with regard to the large number of immigrants entering this country, those English people should also make an issue of why certain communities are allowed a separate ambulance to the rest of us. Certain communities have a distinct ambulance service to the rest of us. They have a distinct police force to the rest of us. They are in fact living in ghettos. Yet this claim was made with regard to the Muslim community in the UK, when that is totally untrue. The Muslim community lives side by side with everyone else. We do not have a distinct ambulance and police service, but yet there is a community that has distinct police, distinct ambulances, and many other things. So there are Jewish grooming gangs. And Epstein, like others, like Weinstein, Roman Polanski, of course the list goes on, Dershowitz, so many Jewish people who have been caught in Jewish grooming gangs that groom not only white girls, they groom South American girls, and even young girls taken from Eastern countries. So in this Jewish grooming gang affair that occurred over decades with Jeffrey Epstein, who was born in 1953, he's born in New York and he's Jewish, Ashkenazi, and he drops out of university. And later in the 1970s, he works in a high school, a university in fact, without a qualification, without a university degree. And then in the 1980s, he works for Greenberg, another Jew, and of course the Federal Reserve, one of the main founders of the Federal Reserve in the United States of America, which was founded in 1913, was a Jew, but many of the chairmen of the Federal Reserve were also Jewish, like Alan Greenspan and others. Alan Greenspan was the chairman of the Federal Reserve in the 1980s. But you check the number of Jewish chairmen of the Federal Reserve, the United States Federal Reserve, you'll find many of them to be Jewish. If they were Muslim or Arab, it would have been referred to as an Arab conspiracy or a Muslim conspiracy. But Jeffrey Epstein, when he worked for the Bear and Stearns Bank in the 1980s, he became well known for his financial dealings. And he constructed a major network of contacts within the 1980s and throughout the 1990s. And of course, he meets Ghislaine Maxwell, another Jewish woman, who is the daughter of Robert Maxwell. And Robert Maxwell, the owner of the Daily Mirror at the time, Robert Maxwell was an operative for Mossad. Mossad, the secret service of what is known as Israel today. Robert Maxwell was a British citizen, but an operative for Mossad. He moves to the United States of America in around 1990 as an arm, an extended arm of the Rothschild family members. And of course, the Rothschild family, banking family, does not need an introduction. It's a Zionist banking family that had considerable influence in the United Kingdom, even in the 1800s, to the point that Britain's only Jewish prime minister, Benjamin Disraeli, his name was Benjamin as well, Benjamin Disraeli, the one who refers to Queen Victoria as the Empress of India. So after the 1857 mutiny of South Asian people against the occupation in South Asia, the whole of South Asia, meaning what is today known as India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Kashmir, all this region, the 1857 mutiny, there is a Jewish Prime Minister of England whose name is Benjamin Disraeli. He declares Victoria as the Empress of India, and he annexes India, what is known as India, Hind, Biladul Hind, to the British Empire. At that time, one of the most influential banking families within the UK was the Rothschild banking family. That family that later would purchase in the late 1800s, purchase land across Palestine and fund Zionist ideology. So Robert Maxwell, he owed the Daily Mirror newspaper. He moves to the United States of America as an extension of the Rothschild family, and James Goldsmith, the father-in-law of Imran Khan, James Goldsmith, who is the relative of the Rothschild family also, he also moves to the United States of America. Remember this James Goldsmith and Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher was carrying out her reforms against industrial Britain, and there were clear clashes between Goldsmith and the British establishment at that time. But this Goldsmith, he moves to the United States of America as an extension of the Rothschild family within the United States of America and to entrench their influence within the United States of America. Now, what occurs at that time is that Robert Maxwell, the Mossad operative, he commits suicide in 1991 on his boat. He has a boat, he commits suicide. And Ghislaine Maxwell, his daughter, his wife, Robert Maxwell's wife, and Ghislaine Maxwell are the people who arrive to the boat of Robert Maxwell, and there are claims that you can find that mention that Ghislaine Maxwell removes documentation found on the boat. There were reasons why Robert Maxwell's death has been blamed on Mossad, and some of them have even implicated Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell, at the time, was representing her father's enterprise and empire in the United States of America. But after the death of her father, she associates with Epstein. Now, there was a dinner held after the death of Robert Maxwell in the same year, in late 1991, when Epstein attended that dinner with Ghislaine Maxwell. So their association is from the very early 1990s. But Epstein's association with intelligence services is found earlier in the 1980s. For instance, his association with Adnan Khashoggi. Now that name Khashoggi sounds familiar because there was a journalist known as Jamal Khashoggi, who is the nephew of Adnan Khashoggi. This nephew, Jamal Khashoggi, was killed in the Saudi embassy. And of course, recent Epstein files have documented that that murder was in fact a framing from the UAE against the government of Saudi Arabia, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Nevertheless, Adnan Khashoggi was a Mossad operative, that one of those Mossad operatives that trained the likes of Epstein in espionage and in blackmailing. Now there is a clear link of these blackmailing rings to crime and criminal networks within the United States of America. For instance, Roy Cohn, who is the person that Donald Trump would look up to as his guide in chief, and the person who would guide him in terms of business, Roy Cohn, was known for his criminal networks as well as blackmailing. And it is not without coincidence, it's not coincidence that Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein would meet in hotels and in public buildings, restaurants that were owned by Donald Trump. There was a clear association between Epstein and Donald Trump. Now recently, the issue relating to Andrew, who is the former Prince Andrew, of course, Andrew came to light, the issue with Andrew came to light after Virginia Roberts brought to the public attention that Andrew, Prince Andrew at the time, had slept with her and raped her. At the time, she was around 17. Now, she had associated with Epstein at a young age. She came from an abusive background and ran away from a detention center at the age of 15, and then was groomed by billionaires within the United States of America. This is how these people, they function. And why was Prince Andrew at the time, and remember when Prince Andrew begins his association with Ghislaine Maxwell, of course Epstein claims that his association with the British royal family started in the 1970s when he came to Britain. In the early 1970s, supposedly he played the piano with a famous piano player in the presence of the Queen. This is the supposed story, and he had some links with the royal family from that time. That is a claim. Whether it is substantiated or not, that needs to be looked at. But Ghislaine Maxwell already had links with the British establishment. Her father was a part of the British establishment. And why did they associate with Andrew? Remember, Andrew had divorced his wife Fergie in 1996. By the year 2000 and 2001, he may have dated different women, but at that time, he was in charge of international trade, of British international trade. At that time, the name of that specific company was changed, but the task and the role given to Andrew at the time was international trade. And in order to have leverage over Andrew and the British establishment, it is very clear that when Andrew spent time with Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein, there was videos and photographs of Andrew caught in compromising situations for which they could blackmail Prince Andrew and, of course, by extension, the royal family, to influence British trade foreign policy. So this is something very important that Nigel Farage, what is referred to as the far right, will never point out. To what extent is British foreign policy and British trade compromised by Mossad? The names that have come out are only of Peter Mandelson and Prince Andrew. But to what degree is British foreign policy and British trade compromised by the likes of Mossad and foreign intelligence agencies? If, of course, this was a Chinese conspiracy, you would have a Chinagate scandal. If it were a Russian conspiracy, and some of these media outlets have attempted to ascribe the Epstein scandal to the KGB, or of course the dissolved KGB, but the current Russian intelligence services, which is absurd. So Andrew was in charge of international trade for Britain at the time. Now, of course, Andrew was also a trustee of charities like Outward Bound Trust. Now, this Outward Bound Trust was a charity that takes, it's still a charity that exists. You can check it on the Charity Commission website. It's a charity that takes children, 150,000 children out into the wilderness, British wilderness, every year for camping and to see the wildlife and the stars and to experience nature. Children from low economic backgrounds, working class children. Andrew was removed from the board of trustees, replaced by his daughter, Princess Beatrice. But the question we need to ask is, why was Andrew not investigated by the Met Police for his association with the children's charity? Why were further inquiries not made, like the further inquiries are not being made currently as we speak with regard to Andrew? And this is not too different to how Jimmy Savile was not investigated thoroughly when he was alive, and Jimmy Savile's association with the royals was the royals at the time, the current king, who at the time was Prince Charles, was not questioned with regard to his association with Jimmy Savile. These are the weaknesses found inherent within the British system that allows grooming gangs, whether they be Pakistani, Jewish, white, whether they involve Edward Heath or Sajid from the local kebab house. No offense to any real Sajid, but there should be no distinction and discrimination, that there are inherent flaws within the establishment and in the institutions that investigate the grooming gangs. Whether it investigates Edward Heath, the former Prime Minister, who is dead now, of course, of Britain, who was a known homosexual and paedophile, active paedophile. Whether it involves Tory MPs, and later I will be playing a video with regard to Tory MPs and the whip from the early 90s, what he stated with regard to Tory MPs. Of course, I will jog your memory and remind you of the reign of David Cameron, when he was asked by our local Birmingham MP Watson with regard to the dossier that detailed MPs that were involved in a paedophile ring. in Downing Street, in Parliament, in Westminster, that has all been brushed under the carpet. So, of course, the establishment, you had the case of Peter Ball, for instance, of the Church of England. 18 young men came forward with regard to his sexual crimes and sexual abuse, yet he was only given a light sentence of 1.5 years because of his association with the Church of England. That is the level of corruption that we have within our institutions in this country and in the United States of America, that children who are under danger, whether that is on the mainland island or whether it's on small islands like the Isle of Man. The abuse scandal on the Isle of Man was such that the homes in which orphans were homed, there were bodies, dead bodies or bones found in the Isle of Man. Institutional abuse of young children. So currently as we speak, there must be more investigation and uncovering by our independent journalists. Then you have what happened with Epstein. He had a woman in the late 90s known as Melanie Walker. This Melanie Walker is a surgeon by profession. And she associated with Prince Andrew at the time. She even attended dinners here in the United Kingdom, royal dinners in the presence of the late Queen Elizabeth II. And Queen Elizabeth herself was complicit in covering Andrew. This woman, Melanie Walker, is close to whom? To Bill Gates. Bill Gates and his wife, who influence without doubt the World Health Organization. And Bill Gates and his wife, they have an institute themselves, or they the Bill Gates Institute for Medicine. You will find that if you check the name of the Bill Gates and his wife's institute, we'll get the name, for influencing bodies like WHO, the World Health Organization, and those things that later influenced vaccines.
It's called the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We check up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that influenced WHO, World Health Organization, and their role in vaccinations, as well as lockdowns that occurred across the world in the year 2020. Nevertheless, Melanie Walker is closely associated with Bill Gates and his wife Melinda. And of course, recently Bill Gates downplayed his association with Epstein. But those of you who can uncover information, you will be able to find these links, and it's important people save that information before information on the internet is deleted and removed. Because what the Zionist media, the Zionist corporations, groups like Google, the Google search engine, they will delete information that they do not want people to be privy to. So then we look at this individual, Leslie Wexner, and his association with Epstein. Now, later in 2006 or around that time, Leslie Wexner broke his association with Epstein, supposedly. So many people in public, they came out and they said, we disassociate from Epstein, but later you will find in the Epstein files that they were actually associated. In fact, some of them would email Epstein. If you search through the Epstein files, you will find emails. Like Noam Chomsky, for instance, who was still emailing Epstein in the year 2018. So Leslie Wexner is a major donor to AIPAC. What is AIPAC? AIPAC is the main lobby group that influences or controls, you can say, American foreign policy in the Middle East towards Palestine, towards occupied Palestine, and a major support for what is known as the State of Israel. This Leslie Wexner, he has the Wexner Foundation. This Leslie Wexner was a person closely associated with Epstein, to the point that Epstein was advising him in finance. It was so bad that Wexner removed his mother from the high position of the company that he had, and he placed Epstein in her place. He fell out with his own mother over Epstein. So Epstein had undue influence on Wexner, and yet the media machine would want us to believe that Epstein had no influence. Or Epstein, for instance, a PBS News article, which I will quote further down. This PBS article refers to Epstein in the following way. It states, a newly released unsealed indictment of disgraced late financier and sex offender. That's all. Financier and sex offender. It doesn't refer to Epstein as a Mossad operative or an asset of the CIA, or a person who was a Zionist and a Jewish supremacist, referring to non-Jews as Goyim. And you check the Epstein files, you will find how he refers to non-Jews. You will find all of that in the Epstein files. Then you find the association of Epstein with the scoundrel known as Dershowitz, a famous lawyer in the United States of America, a famous backer of what is known as the State of Israel. With regard to Wexner, by the way, you check in 2023, this Wexner, Leslie Wexner, donated six-figure sums to AIPAC. Six-figure sums. That's more money than many of us will see in a lifetime. And of course, how this nexus of people functions is anyone who speaks against them, they attempt to destroy them economically or militarily. So then Epstein, aside from being associated with Dershowitz and Leslie Wexner, there are many associations, by the way. I'm just being very selective today. You have the famous association with Bill and Hillary Clinton. When Bill Clinton was president of the United States, this Epstein officially visited the White House 17 times in the years 1993, 1994, and 1995. Most of the visits were done in 1994, but in 1994 there are 3 visits where he returns back, each time twice. So he visits twice a day. There are 3 such type of visits. 17 visits in total. And of course, there is an email which is found also before the Epstein files, which mentions that Epstein's visits to Clinton were of the nature of financial advice. But there are many other scandals within the White House at that time, like the death of a person who worked in the White House. There are many scandals, or the decorating scandal within the White House, which involved Hillary Clinton. And then we have, of course, Peter Mandelson. Peter Mandelson who was a minister of the Blair government during the Blair era, when Blair plundered Iraq and invaded Afghanistan under the pretext, firstly, what our listeners need to know, that the pretext for invading Iraq in 2003 was a false pretext. What was the pretext? The pretext was weapons of mass destruction. The claim was made that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. It turned out to be false. Now everything needs to be reopened. Those who looked into the inquiry, people who died like Robin Cook, was he killed or was it just death by the will of God? Or did Robin Cook actually suffer that death at the hands of the nefarious establishment? Everything needs to be revised and looked at, from the death of Robin Cook, from the events of 9/11, all the way back to 1963, late 1963, to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Everything needs to be reinvestigated. Files need to be reopened. Why would you have Henry Kissinger sitting at the head of the 9/11 Commission? A person who was past the age of 85 perhaps at the time, because actually when he died he was 100 years old, so he was definitely past the age of late 70s, early 80s. An octogenarian, a person who was so old, he was placed, Henry Kissinger, another Jew by the way, who influenced much of American foreign policy in the 1970s in favor of Israel. A person who would work in the favor of Mossad, not in the favor of the United States. But this person is placed at the head of the commission that investigates 9/11. So Jeffrey Archer, a traitor to the United Kingdom, like many other traitors to the United Kingdom. And this is a message to Nigel Farage and MP Rupert and others who will be considered as being at the right wing spectrum, that the country is being undermined by people who give more importance to Mossad, to the internal prosperity of the United Kingdom. So Peter Mandelson now is being exposed for his ties with Epstein, but this also implicates the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer claimed that he has no knowledge of, or he had no knowledge of the depth of involvement of Peter Mandelson with Jeffrey Epstein. A clear lie. A lie from a Prime Minister and an establishment that lied with regard to the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They lied to us with regard to that. They lied to us with regard to Iran-Contra, for instance, in the United States of America, where Iran had sanctions, yet the United States sold weapons to Iran undercover, and then the money that was raised from that was supplied to the Contras to fight the socialist governments in South America. These are governments that lie. And Keir Starmer is lying, like all the others who are in power. You had the likes of Conservative MPs like Jeffrey Archer. Now, Jeffrey Archer, remember him. Some of you perhaps are too young to remember Jeffrey Archer. A Conservative MP who was later arrested. He spent some time in jail. Even he was associated with Ghislaine Maxwell. And in fact, he attended Ghislaine Maxwell's events known as the Kit Kat events. Why were they known as Kit Kat? Even the chocolate bar, the Nestle chocolate bar, is named after Kit Kat. It's a reference to women's emancipation and women's freedom in the 1960s. But Ghislaine Maxwell was not working for women's freedom. Ghislaine Maxwell was running a human trafficking group that abused girls and women. Yet Jeffrey Archer, if you check, he attended those parties that she was claiming, Ghislaine Maxwell was claiming that those parties were done for women to have a space to express themselves, yet she had perverts like Jeffrey Archer attending those events. So now that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, they have served their purpose to their paymasters in the Knesset, to the Rothschild family, to the banking elite, to the entire interlocking system where you will have companies and share companies interlocking into limited companies and then being nestled as holding companies, so no one can really track down who are the people, these globalists who actually control the finance. But I will say to you, it's out in the open. Those they worked for, they became expendable. Why? Because blackmail now transcends the 1980s and the 1990s. How? How does it transcend? How does it transcend the 1980s and the 1990s? How it transcends that is that now you have technological means by which we are all being surveilled. We are all being listened to. So you have Palantir, which also assisted the IDF in killing Palestinians in Gaza, Palantir. Or you have the company that Jeffrey Epstein himself was a part of, which is known as Corbyn, C-O-R-B-Y-N-E, 9/11. Corbyn, 9/11. That technological means entail that people like Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are expendable. Their service time has run out. So strangely enough, with regard to the death of Epstein, they say he died in 2019. You do not know what to believe, because they say he died in a New York cell, and surprise, the cameras were not working, and he supposedly commits suicide. This is like the death of bin Laden. We are told that in 2011, the United States raided Abbottabad, not Abbottabad, or the place they were saying where bin Laden was residing. I think it's Abbottabad, or it's perhaps in Rawalpindi. We'll fact check that. And they raided his home, bin Laden's, and then they got rid of the body by throwing it in the sea. We must believe in the official narrative. Yeah, in Abbottabad. It was in Abbottabad. And after killing bin Laden, they got rid of the body. Why would you get rid of the body? They throw the body in the sea. Similarly, Epstein, he commits suicide. And the cameras are not working. You have a high-profile murderer and rapist who is in charge of a major human trafficking project, and yet the cameras at his prison are not working. This reminds you of Jean-Luc Brunel. Now, Jean-Luc Brunel was an associate of Epstein that worked in the fashion industry. And Virginia Roberts, she claimed that this John Luke Brunel was also one of the rapists that raped her, one of the people who assaulted her. And later on, what happened, he was arrested, and around 2021 he's in jail. But then suddenly, around that time, you check the exact date, perhaps it's 2022, Jean-Luc Brunel, he commits suicide also, and the cameras are not working. Go fact check that. Jean-Luc Brunel. So both Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel commit suicide where the cameras are not working. That is what we are supposed to believe. Now, the days of labeling conspiracies as being conspiracy theorists are gone. And of course, do not conflate this with flat earth theory. I'm not addressing people who believe in flat earth theory. That's absurd. I'm referring to real conspiracy that now has been exposed. So what actually happens, did you check Jean-Luc Brunel? So what happens, in 2005, Palm Beach police begin investigating Epstein after the family of a 14-year-old girl reports she was molested at his mansion. Now, why did this happen? Why did this leak happen? Epstein, in general, would abuse girls and women. So yes, Jean-Luc Brunel was killed or committed suicide, we don't know, in 2022. So what Epstein did, when he would procure girls and women from modeling agents or through different means of institutions or financial groups, he did not face prosecution. But what happened, he then targeted young girls from families that were below the living wage and from a lower economic background, socio-economic background. And those vulnerable girls were the girls that eventually reported him. So the family of a 14-year-old girl in Palm Beach, remember he had homes in New York where he had homes where he would, where in fact Andrew, the former prince, he attended those homes. Townhouse, he had a townhouse in New York. He may have had two. And he had a home in Palm Beach, which had pictures of underage girls across the walls, every room. Yet the police at that time did not prosecute him for that. But what happened, in May 2006, police officials signed paperwork to charge Epstein with multiple counts of unlawful intercourse with a minor. But listen to this. The county's top prosecutor, state attorney, Barry Krischer, spelt as Krischer, takes the unusual step of sending the case to a grand jury. And then what happens? In July 2006, Epstein is arrested after a grand jury indicts him on account of soliciting prostitution. The relatively minor charge, it's relatively minor because compared to what he did, upsets Palm Beach police leaders who publicly accused Krischer of giving Epstein special treatment. Now, we need to fact check this Krischer. This Judge Krischer, who is he? Is he Jewish? You can check attorney Barry Krischer. We will fact check him also. And then what happens after that is in June 2008, Epstein pleads guilty to state charges, one count of soliciting prostitution and one count of soliciting prostitution from someone under the age of 18. He is sentenced to 18 months in jail under a secret arrangement. The US Attorney's Office agrees not to prosecute Epstein for federal crimes. So Epstein was still protected. Epstein serves most of his sentence in a work release program that allows him to leave jail during the day. So this criminal, in 2008, he's prosecuted for lesser charges when he was a human trafficker. And he is permitted to leave the jail during the day. Then what happens? In May 2009, Virginia Roberts files a lawsuit claiming Epstein and Maxwell arranged for her to have encounters, meaning promiscuous encounters, with the following: royalty, politicians, academicians, meaning academics, businessmen, and others. So when some people on the dyad left, they downplay Noam Chomsky's association with Epstein, they should not downplay it. The reality is we do not know what actually occurred. And Noam Chomsky is now 97 years old and too ill to answer. But the association is bad enough. The fact that he was giving him consolation in 2018, is giving him consolation. Then in March 2011, the Daily Mail publishes an interview with Virginia Roberts. And at that time, she mentions Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Lord Mountbatten was a part of the royal family that the Irish particularly did not like. So that is the time when the picture of Andrew is released with, at the time, with Roberts, and then the FBI agents involve themselves. And then what happens in December 30th, 2014, her lawyers, Virginia Roberts' lawyers, filed court papers claiming she had encounters with Mountbatten Windsor and other men, including foreign presidents, a well-known prime minister, and other world leaders. Now, all these men, of course, deny the allegations. And then in 2018, FBI agents and the US Attorney's Office in Manhattan begin a new investigation into Epstein. So this is in 2018. And then in July 6th, 2019, by the way, during that time, Queen Elizabeth was protecting Andrew at that time. She was protecting Andrew at the time. Diabolical. In the past, the media criticized me for referring to her as disgusting. But in reality, the word that should have been utilized is diabolical. Then, in 2019, Epstein is arrested on new sex trafficking charges brought by the prosecutors in New York, not in the Palm Beach area, in Florida, not in Florida, who have concluded they aren't bound by the earlier non-prosecution agreement with Epstein in Florida. So this is something that needs to be pointed out. I will reiterate this, that Epstein in Florida had a non-prosecution agreement. It was only because of the New York prosecutors that he was arrested. And days later, Acosta resigns as Labour Secretary. Now this man, Acosta, he is the person who said that Epstein is an intelligence service asset, or he works for an intelligence service. Acosta, who was the Labour secretary. Fact check it yourselves. Acosta had said this. So this Acosta now resigns as Labour secretary because, of course, they had this non-prosecution agreement with Epstein in Florida. Why non-prosecution? Because he was protected. But then issues caught up. And then on August 10th, 2019, Epstein, we are told by the establishment, kills himself in his jail cell in New York. Now, someone who is high profile is always watched for suicide watch. But suddenly the cameras are not working and Epstein kills himself. And then in July the 2nd, 2020, federal prosecutors in New York charge Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, the Mossad asset, with sex crimes, saying she helped recruit and abuse Epstein's victims. And then on December the 30th, 2021, after a month-long trial, a jury what happens is a judge makes more court records public in a related lawsuit. And then what happens, Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, was sentenced, but many other things happened, like what? For instance, January the 20th, 2025, Trump, who was friends and neighbors with Epstein for years, friends and neighbors, becomes president again. And at that time, due to the pressure from good-minded people, he's pressured to release the Epstein files. But of course, you have Attorney General Pam Bondi, who says in 2025 in a Fox News Channel interview that an Epstein client list is sitting on her desk. And she has also said that if that list is released, none of the establishment will be left. Many of them are implicated in this. Then, what is mentioned in the Wall Street Journal on July the 17th, 2025, was the Wall Street Journal describes a very sexually suggestive letter that the newspaper says bore Trump's name and was included in a 2003 album for Epstein's 50th birthday. Trump denies writing the letter and sues the newspaper. So Trump has tried his best to preserve his reputation. And what happened is in the same year, in last year, in July 24th, which is in 2025, a person known as Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche interviews Maxwell. She denies wrongdoing and says she never saw Trump involved in any sexually inappropriate activity. Now, of course, she says that to gain clemency from presidential pardon. I say this, she's doing that to get presidential pardon. But how can she deny any wrongdoing? The fact she is denying any wrongdoing suggests very strongly that she is in fact a liar. Now, there are many other details, but what has happened now is that the Epstein files have been released. Now, before going to other documentation, we will open up for a quick questions and answers, and then we will go back into the Epstein files. There are many other aspects of the Epstein files that you will be surprised to see which sheikh was in the Epstein files. We will cover that also. Not sheikh as the oil sheikhs, as in Islamic sheikh. We will see. So we will open up for questions, and then if your questions are engaging, someone says the Epstein files will break the system. I believe the system has already been broken. Someone says, I've tried to buy your books, but the websites I have visited say it's out of stock. Try Madani Bookstore in Preston. Some members of the UAE royal family are on those files. Does this surprise you? No, it does not surprise me. The UAE royal family is a Zionist Yahudi family. And one of the high profile members of UAE society even gave the kiswa of the Kaaba, the covering of the Kaaba, to Epstein, who utilized it as a carpet. Someone says, Assalamu alaikum. Sorry for going off topic. Do you think the amount of water used to cool AI will be a cause for the droughts at the end of times? The answer is no. I do not believe that will be the cause of the droughts. Someone says, thoughts on Epstein standing on the kiswa. This could be related to some devilish ritual that they have with regard to the kiswa, because these people believe in energies and the flow of energies. So the number of Hujjaj that enter the Makkah al-Mukarramah, the number of Hujjaj, they believe their energy is on that kiswa. And he places the kiswa on the ground. So someone asks, someone says, your sheikh, your camera has gone off. Do not worry, it's not a conspiracy. Someone asks, who is your favorite qari of the Quran? Sheikh Muhyiddin Abul Hassan al-Kurdi rahimahullah. Someone says, do you think that the kiswa was used for magic? Perhaps. وَاتَّبَعُوا مَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينُ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ. They follow whatever the Satans were reciting in the kingdom of Sulaiman. And the same ayah mentions, وَمَا أُنزِلَ عَلَى الْمَلَكَيْنِ بِبَابِلَ هَارُوتَ وَمَارُوتَ. They were following the Babylonian magic. Groups of Jews follow Babylonian magic and grimoires, magic grimoires. This is a fact. Someone says, Sheikh, are you going to talk about the Baal in the Epstein files? Go and check Surah Al-Safat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Ilyas alayhi salam when he addresses Bani Israel. And Ilyas alayhi salam condemns Bani Israel that they worship Baal. Baal was a false god that they worshipped. Okay, we will move on, and inshallah we will resume questions shortly. But before we do so, what I wanted to mention is some people have asked with regard to Epstein files, how do intelligence services influence and interact with people? So some people were asking, with regard to why the intelligence services would be interested in academics. So these are known as access agents. What is the value of an access agent? I'm reading here from an article from the internet, which was published on February 10th, and it's on a website known as The Conversation. And they mention something which is known as access agents. So what the author states is the value of an access agent is not the secrets they have access to, but the social and professional access they provide to people who do. People in high-end society, scientific research, banking, politics, and culture make excellent targets for access agents. And remember, Epstein would even visit museums like the Louvre in Paris. Virginia Roberts, he took her to the Louvre museum. But sometimes why Ghislaine Maxwell would go to art galleries is in order to entice young, vulnerable girls and women by offering them funding, or offering them an education, or offering them basic amenities and a good future, and then encroach on them and lure them into the grooming gangs, or the Jewish grooming gang of Epstein. So what this article states regarding these access agents, and from an agency's point of view, the best thing is that these agents are deniable and under the radar. So some have stated that it's possible that they could have been access agents, but I do not think so. I believe the tycoon Robert Maxwell, firstly, he was Mossad. His daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, most positively is Mossad. And of course, Epstein, who associated with Adnan Khashoggi, was also Mossad. And they were Mossad operatives. And remember, Mossad even undermines the CIA, but the CIA does not take affirmative action on the Mossad, because in reality, the elite that established what is known as Israel today control the CIA, control the United States, control the entire Western hegemony, control the entire Western infrastructure of power, as has been demonstrated even with Andrew and here also with Keir Starmer, and is now being demonstrated even with Shabana Mahmood. So even if Shabana Mahmood became the next prime minister, as a woman of Muslim background, she will still follow Zionist policy, because the policies are written out for you. You have no brain of your own. You have no two brain cells of your own, or you have no spine to speak the truth, because policy is written out for you. So the entire structure, power structure, the entire managerial method, the structuralism, is controlled by Zionists and bankers that control policy. Now this Ghislaine Maxwell is an anti-Semite. I'll repeat that again. She's an anti-Semite. All you people who think Semite is only Semitic Jews, no, it's Arabs included. Why was she an anti-Semite? In the Epstein files, you find this email from Ghislaine Maxwell to Jacqueline Marcus, and the date is 15th of October 2001. And it's after the Twin Towers were destroyed. And of course 9/11 needs to be reopened and investigated. And nothing can be trusted from the establishment. She writes, this is her anti-Arab, anti-Semitic email. She states, it is the year 2032 and a father and his son walk the streets of Lower Manhattan, approaching the site where the World Trade Center used to be in the end of the 20th century. The father sighs and comments, to think that right here used to be the Twin Towers. The son, not understanding, asks his father, what are the Twin Towers? The father smiles and looks at the son and explains, the Twin Towers were two huge buildings that used to be here until 2001 when the Arabs destroyed them. The son looks up to his father and asks, and what are the Arabs? What is she implying? The destruction of the Arabs. And of course, that is what Jewish supremacism advocates. The ethnic cleansing of Arabs, the removal of Arabs from their lands. And only recently, certain Gulf states have awoken that there is actually a greater Israel project. What we are witnessing now is the expediting of the greater Israel project, the expansion of Israel in its influence from the kidnapping of the Venezuelan president and the exporting of Venezuelan oil from Venezuela to what is known as Israel for the first time. Venezuelan oil being exported to what is known as Israel after the Venezuelan president is kidnapped wrongly by the United States. And Keir Starmer cannot condemn it because he is an agent of Zionism. Like many of the MPs that we have, Zionist agents, where Zionists may fund their political party. We just need to check the donors to these organizations and political parties, and we will realize why politicians are saying what they say. Just look at the donors who fund them. Just look at the donors of simpletons like Tommy Robinson. So, of course, the compromising of the entire system is to such an extent that here in Britain, you have Epstein and British connections. So in the Epstein files, we have this email, which our technicians will place on the screen. You can see that this email was sent on the 27th of September 2019, and the subject was Epstein and British connections. And it was from Jean James and two, and the names are redacted, but what is mentioned is New York and FBI. And there is a carbon copy sent to Berman Jeffrey. Subject, Epstein and British connections. So dear, redacted name, ex-UK Metropolitan Police Detective John Wedger, and by the way, recently Manchester Police is implicated recently also with regard to something to do with the Epstein files. Those of you who are listening, you can check that. But here it states ex-UK Metropolitan Police Detective John Wedger knows a lot about juvenile prostitution and child sexual abuse in the UK, and the fact that it generates a lot of money for the British establishment. He was persecuted by police and the British government because he was doing a good job exposing the racketeering involving children's homes and VIPs very high up in British society. He might be useful in your inquiries. John Wedger email, and the email is supplied, but it's redacted here. Here is an interview that he gave recently, and it's a YouTube link. Procurer of children, Jimmy Savile, was on very close terms with royalty and politicians, and more YouTube links. The British establishment pushed Chief Constable Mike Veal out of his job, like they did with our Birmingham Chief of Police recently. because he was doing by Zionists also, because he was doing an honest investigation into Jimmy Savile and his high-level connections. Mr. Veal felt the need to make a public statement, but he was still kicked out for doing his job. And there's a YouTube link there. Jimmy Savile was protected by the British government for almost 50 years and was even sent on an ambassadorial missions to Israel. Why? Yes, this is something not pointed out by people. Jimmy Savile was a friend of Israel. Jimmy Savile was sent as an ambassador to Israel. Something never pointed out. It won't be pointed out by Rupert, the MP, the new MP, the right-wing guy who rightly points out grooming gangs, Pakistani grooming gang. Point them out. But be consistent, Mr. Rupert. Be consistent, Mr. Right-wing Reform Party. So, he was a third-rate entertainer and no more. He spent 11, meaning in reference to Jimmy Savile, he spent 11 Christmases as the guest of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher at her country residence, Chequers. He was a frequent guest at Buckingham Palace and in one public interview bragged that he had smuggled a small female child into the palace. And of course he had ties with the king when he was Prince Charles. So that is British establishment cover-ups. There is an institutional problem. And Tommy Robinson is only pointing out the Pakistani grooming gangs. Point them all out. Jail all the pedophiles. In fact, reintroduce execution into this country and have them executed. All the pedophiles. So, like this, there are many interesting details found in the Epstein files. Just out of interest, this is just out of interest, a person called Austin Hill emailed Jeffrey Epstein on Saturday, November the 11th, and the subject was Imran Hussein, Sheikh Imran Hussein. And he supplies him with a link. This is not implicating Sheikh Imran Hussein in a bad way. He leaves a link of the biography of Imran Hussein. So Epstein was interested in Sheikh Imran Hussein, or someone known as Austin Hill emailed Jeffrey Epstein. But what is interesting about this is that this email was sent in 2017 after the Florida conviction, a year before the New York conviction. Going on to more serious matters, there was an email from Jeffrey Epstein to someone with a redacted name regarding Roman Polanski. But before we do that, did you find out the detail of that judge?
There's nothing disclosed whether he was or wasn't a Jew. So either way, there's no...
So there's no disclosure whether that judge is Jewish or not. But it does matter. Why does it matter? It matters because the chief rabbi of England has never condemned Israel for its war crimes. It does matter. When a Muslim cleric of high standing does not condemn ISIS, it becomes a matter of concern. Why should it not be a concern when the chief rabbi of England is not coming out to condemn Israel in its war crimes? So what happens is that Jeffrey Epstein, in 2009, he sends an email to someone, the name is redacted. He writes regarding Roman Polanski, the Hollywood director of films, who, as far as I know, is currently serving a jail sentence. But what he mentions, they arrested Roman Polanski in Switzerland on his old charges 28 years later. This is important. Roman Polanski is a Jewish pedophile part of the Jewish pedophile grooming gangs that are found in the United States of America. And Roman Polanski is hailed as a Hollywood hero by the Hollywood establishment. Yet better film directors like Mel Gibson, a Catholic, Mel Gibson, is reviled and referred to as anti-Semitic, which is false. It's a false claim. But Mel Gibson is reviled, like Spike Lee now is reviled by the Jewish supremacists that control the narrative in Hollywood. Yet Roman Polanski, hailed as a hero in Hollywood, he made a film called Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary's Baby is a film he made in the 1960s regarding devil worship. What happens is that Rosemary is raped by the devil because her husband is part of a devil worshipping cult. And she has a baby, which is the baby of Lucifer, which will be the Antichrist. These are the type of movies he was making. He was making movies regarding themes like Lolita, and of course Epstein's aeroplane was referred to by the British tabloids as Lolita Express in reference to underage sex. And Roman Polanski is seen as a hero. Yet what I believe is that Stanley Kubrick's death needs to be looked at. All of these things need to be reinvestigated. Why the sudden death of Stanley Kubrick? But Roman Polanski is deemed a hero in Hollywood, a Jewish pedophile. Yet here Epstein is concerned that 28 years later they arrest Roman Polanski in Switzerland. And of course, in that region, he had run away to France because there were charges on him in the United States. And France has much uncovering to do with regard to the Epstein files. There is much to be uncovered in France alone. Then we have another document from the Epstein files with regard to Gordon Brown. So this document with regard to Gordon Brown, and by the way, this is just a quick search we did. I carried out with a few students just for a few minutes, and we found this much information. But here is a document from a Leslie Gruff, and the subject is firstly the date. The date is 2014. These people are associating with Epstein after he was convicted in Florida and sentenced in Florida. Of course, it wasn't much of a sentence. The man was living freely in daytime hours, and he was safe from further prosecution. But what happens? The subject is invitation to a breakfast for Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, second fiddle to Tony Blair, a one-eyed Dajjal. He has one eye, literally. Gordon Brown. And what it states, hosted by Mort Zuckerman and Bob Rubin. Zuckerman sounds Jewish to me. So the subject is Bob Rubin and I are hosting a breakfast for Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of the UK, at 8 a.m. on Monday, 22nd of September at my home. So his address is redacted. I hope you can join us for what will be a very intriguing conversation. Best regards, Mart.
He was a Jew, yeah.
Yes, Zuckerman.
Yeah, yeah.
Zuckerman is a Jew. Yes, the name shows he's a Jew. So here, intriguing conversation with Gordon Brown. What did you discuss with Gordon Brown? Of course, pro-Israel policies, undermining the British people, undermining British foreign policy, the autonomy of British foreign policy. Like Shabana Mahmood, they would love you to be prime minister. A brown woman, Muslim woman, who validates the coming war on Iran, or the strikes on Iran. They would love that. But you will be reading from the hymn sheets of the Zionists. And then here is another email from Ronald Weiser. And the 2 is redacted, but this is in 2018. Now, what is interesting about this email, the Mossad connection, Trump, Epstein, Clinton exposed murder. So here, you look at this one, the subject is forward, veterans today, the Mossad connection, Trump, Epstein, Clinton exposed murder, child sex abuse. The date is Thursday, 29th of November 2018. Look at this. They mention the importance. And what do they write? Importance, normal. I repeat, the importance is normal. This is normal for them. Sick individuals. And what it states, best regards, Ambassador Ronald Weiser, retired. And then redacted, sent from handheld, begin forwarded message, Larry Brayboy. The entire message is redacted. The entire message is redacted. It mentions Trump, Epstein, Clinton. And what I would want to mention here is Cathy O'Brien. There was a woman called Cathy O'Brien. She wrote a book called The Transformation of America. Trans as in TRANCE. Transformation as in trans. She made claims about Clinton and Bush being involved in a satanic ring. You should look these claims up. Cathy O'Brien was dismissed for many years. I believe those things should be reopened and reinvestigated. Cathy O'Brien, The Transformation of America. Then we have another email which is regarding Robert Maxwell threatening Mossad. This email is from Jeffrey Epstein. So his email is gvacation at gmail.com. Remember, all these emails are compromised. The internet services read your emails. All of them are compromised. So this was sent on Thursday, March the 15th, 2018, before the Manhattan arrest, before the New York arrest of Epstein. The subject was he was passed away. What does it state? Robert Maxwell threatened Mossad. Robert Maxwell, the man who died in 1991, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, he told them that unless they give him 400 million to save his crumbling empire, he would expose all he had done for them. So Robert Maxwell threatened Mossad, Ehud Barak and Benjamin Netanyahu. Al-kufru millatun wahida. Kufr is one millah. Sometimes these Knesset Jews, they pretend to fight one another, but in reality, Netanyahu and Ehud Barak are one. And what is stated, in that time he had free access to Margaret Thatcher's Downing Street, to Ronald Reagan's White House, to the Kremlin, and to the corridors of power throughout Europe. Robert Maxwell, one agent of Mossad, is described by Epstein as having access to Margaret Thatcher's Downing Street, Ronald Reagan's White House, and don't forget it was the King of Brunei, Sultan of Brunei, at the behest of Fayed, who was known as Muhammad al-Fayed, the Egyptian businessman, who went to Brunei for 2 weeks to convince the Sultan of Brunei to bail out the United Kingdom with cash, billions in cash. So these are Muslims involved within this power structure. Later on, of course, when Dodi Al-Fayed was killed in the Diana episode, 1997, and I believe the Diana murders should be reopened. Everything needs to be re-examined. Your conspiracy theorist label has no weight. Everything must be objectively re-examined. Then Muhammad Al-Fayed, he turned against the establishment at that time. But before that, you were doing their bidding like a typical Indian waiter during the colonial times. And now like the UAE family. So what is mentioned is Maxwell passed on all the secrets he learned to Mossad in Tel Aviv. So he would pass all the secrets to Mossad in Tel Aviv. In turn, they tolerated his excesses, vanities, and insatiable appetite for a luxurious lifestyle and women. He told his controllers who they should target and how they should do it. He appointed himself as Israel's unofficial ambassador to the Soviet bloc. This is what Epstein writes regarding Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. And of course, all of them were operatives of Mossad. And of course, there's much more to be detailed in the Epstein files. For instance, what has come out with regard to Epstein and Qatar, he says that Epstein said Qatar had to sing and dance for Israel like Modi to escape blockade. So what he did write regarding this, what Epstein wrote, is the Indian Prime Minister Modi took advice and danced and sang in Israel for the, of course not literally, in Israel for the benefit of the US president. They had met a few weeks ago. It worked. He was suggesting that the Qatar's problems could go away if it stopped kicking and arguing and forged closer ties to Israel. And he said Qatar needed to follow India's example, which has emerged as a close Israeli partner. Why is this important? Why this is important is because destabilizing fasad fil ard, corruption in the earth, is the hallmark of al-Yahud. They cause corruption in the earth. Balochistan separatism, then the bombing of a Shia masjid in Pakistan recently, is to warn the Pakistani establishment, if you do not comply with the invasion of Iran, we will destabilize your country by funding and ideologically sporting Balochi separatists and other separatists within Pakistan, and causing sectarian division in Pakistan that leads to violence like the blowing up of a Shia masjid, killing innocent civilians. That is destabilizing Pakistan as a warning. And similarly to other countries, bombing Syria to warn the current Syrian government that if you do not comply with our policies, we will destroy you. And like this, all the other Arabs being held to ransom, whether financially, economically, militarily, socially, through pressure groups and through divisive groups. So, just to finish, there was something to do with the Kinkora British intelligence run sex abuse brothel, but we will leave that for another time because there are many cover-ups that actually occur, and ministers and politicians like Nigel Farage and MP Rupert do not address. They only address populist issues but do not address the entire dragon structure or the spider's web. But before concluding on our summary of, before we move on to some videos, the Met Police say they will stop arresting people for supporting Palestine action after High Court ruling. Now this article was released on the 16th of February, Now, after the High Court ruling referred to the judgment that the fact that proscription still remains in place. So Palestine Action is deemed a terrorist organization, which is of course absurd, because then the suffragettes and similar type of groups would have been in their time proscribed. So remains in place, and so showing support for Palestine Action is still a criminal offense. So it's still a criminal offense. But the Met acknowledged that the unusual circumstances may cause some confusion among the public as to what happens next. So officers will continue to identify offences where support for Palestine Action is being expressed, but they will focus on gathering evidence of those offences and the people involved to provide opportunities for enforcement. That is because of a High Court ruling. And the High Court, the Supreme Court in England, that Supreme Court ruling, what did Shabana Mahmood say? Shabana Mahmood, she says that the ruling was disappointing and that she will fight to prevent the proscription being lifted. She says, as a former Lord Chancellor, I have the deepest respect for our judiciary. Home secretaries must, however, retain the ability to take action to protect our national security and keep the public safe. Let me tell you something, Shabana Mahmood. You are not keeping the public safe. You are keeping Elbit safe. That they can make weapons or parts that are utilized in weapons, in drones, that kill young children. Where is your conscience? Where is your Islam? You are not protecting the British people. You are protecting your Zionist interests. You are hoping to be prime minister by selling your soul to the devil. You are selling your soul to the devil. So now we will move on to some videos very quickly, and then we will conclude perhaps with a quick Q&A. So what is the first video that we have? So this is Thomas Massie, who says the whole government is pro-Israel and covering up the Epstein files. So let's see what this Thomas Massie, who is an American senator or congressman, one of the two.
Well, he got tired of me winning, so he joined our side. I have no animosity toward him. I regret that it got personal for some folks, but it never has for me. It's always been about the survivors.
What do you think of this reversal? I mean, after months of fighting here.
Well, the Speaker, the Attorney General, the FBI Director, the President, and the Vice President could have saved us all this time and embarrassment, frankly, for our own party if they'd just done the right thing 4 months ago.
Do you believe him, Congressman? I mean, for weeks he's been pushing against this. Now he says he supports it. Do you buy it?
He's only supporting it because the President told him to support it.
No,
That's what Mike Johnson does.
No, I'm talking about, do you buy President Trump saying that he wants the House to pass this resolution?
Well, I'm concerned that now he's opening a flurry of investigations, and I believe they may be trying to use those investigations as a predicate for not releasing the files. That's my concern.
Do you think they'll try to block it?
Well, they will. I'm afraid they're going to try to use a provision of the law that allows you not to release these materials if they're subject of an ongoing investigation and would harm, and the release of which would harm the ongoing investigation.
So what do you think this is all about for President Trump? First he was blocking this, pushing Republicans to block this for so long. Now he's reversing course, and he has the power to release the full files anyway.
Well, it's pretty simple. For 4 months, he thought the best thing for him was to keep the files secret, and somebody convinced him that the best thing for him was to release the files. And if they're serious about it, they should release them right now. It's that simple.
Why do you think he is working so hard not to get them released for so many months? What do you think the real reason is?
These files implicate billionaires and friends of his and political donors that he's trying to protect. And Epstein also had close ties to our own intelligence agencies and Israel's intelligence agencies. That's why there's so much effort in trying to stop this. And I do believe they'll try to stop it somewhere else. And that's going to backfire on them too.
So the president's saying he'll sign it. You don't buy that?
No, I think he'll sign it. I want to be there at the signing party.
Think he'll be invited?
I've never seen somebody not get invited to sign their own bill.
But what about just a personal nature of this? I mean, again, he goes after you, your wife, calls Marjorie Taylor Greene a traitor.
Let's be clear, he went after my late wife and my current wife.
What do you think about that?
I think it's a new low for him, but again, we laughed it off. It's more to his detriment than mine that he, put something like that out. But I think it was beyond the pale, and if that's what it took for him to go that far to realize he needs to support this instead of opposing it, then that's okay.
And
By the way, my wife has laughed about it. She did tell me to invite Trump to the wedding, and I didn't, so she blames me for him getting mad.
Are you optimistic this will pass tomorrow?
Yeah, I think it's going to pass. I think it's going to pass with a veto-proof majority.
Do you think the speaker will support it?
I think begrudgingly he has to at this point.
Congressman, you obviously had your differences with President Trump in the past, but Congressman Green was one of his closest allies, one of his strongest supporters. What do you make of the fact that over the Epstein files it prompted this such a public and searing breakup?
Well, Marjorie represents the base. I mean, she represents what we campaigned on. More so than me, even the populist movement that, brought Trump into the White House. And when he told his supporters that they're no longer his supporters if they still want the Epstein files released, he lost a lot of supporters, but Marjorie didn't. And she's in favor of finding justice for these survivors. And so she won the argument.
Do you think that President Trump has lost his touch on the MAGA base? Has lost his understanding of the MAGA base?
I think on aspects of fiscal responsibility, on aspects of starting wars overseas and getting into regime change, and on this case of releasing the Epstein files, I think he has strayed away from the things that he campaigned on.
So that was Thomas Massie. We will check whether he was a check, guys, if he was is a senator or a congressman, Thomas Massie, and he mentions that there are great implications in the Epstein files. So this is official. Now there are some questions people are asking. Why would they expose the Epstein files? Remember, not everyone who works in the police is corrupt.
Congressman.
So this is Congressman Thomas Massie, and he's discussing a vote in Congress with regard to the Epstein files and whether the Epstein files should be, the redacted aspect should be removed. So not everyone is corrupt within the institutions, within the West, but many people in power are compromised by this network that we have exposed today. Some people are asking also with regard to some of the questions you are asking, we have already covered in this live stream, but someone asks, thoughts on his temple looking like a mosque with a dome. Yes, and you will notice that he attempted to make it look like Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. There is a resemblance of the dome with the gold dome of Qubbatu Sakhra, the dome of the rock. And they claim that the dome was blown away by a hurricane after his arrest. So I have not covered today, satanic rituals, cannibalism. I have not touched upon that. And there is much to be uncovered in the coming weeks and months. And of course, they are attempting to convince the United States now to carry out a strike on Iran. And that is something we may observe in the coming weeks or days. Allah knows best. But we do have another video, which is this is a video of a Tory whip regarding hush-up pedophile scandals. This video is from 1992, from the early 90s. What occurs amongst British pedophiles within Westminster? How do they cover it up? This is more than 30 years before Pakistani grooming gangs. This is Westminster pedophiles. So we play this video.
The government whips build up dossiers of information, both political and personal, about their flocks. And the whips also act as a kind of welfare agency for MPs. One Tory whip claims they perform 1,000 acts of unremarked kindness each year for Tory MPs who face personal problems.
Anyone with any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth and say, no, I'm in a jam, can you help? It might be debt, it might be scandal involving small boys, or any kind of scandal which a member.
So note here, he mentioned scandals involving young boys, which they cover up.
Seemed likely to be mixed up in. They'd come and ask if we could help. And if we could, we did. And we would do everything we can, because we would store up brownie points. That sounds a pretty nasty reason, but it's one of the reasons. Is if we could get a chap out of trouble, then he'll do as we ask forevermore.
The Tory whips approach rich Conservatives to help bail out MPs facing bankruptcy in order to...
So note here, what the Tory whip states is that they utilize that to have leverage over the MPs. So this blackmailing scandal of Epstein is not limited to Epstein. It's found in all governments. It's found in the upper echelons of power. Do we have any other video? So that's it for today. Before concluding, inshallah, Ramadan is approaching. Have a good Ramadan, and I will just take your last few questions and then we will conclude. So if you have good questions, I will entertain them. Someone states, Sheikh, the British have removed Palestine name from the British Museum and replaced it with Canaanites. Yes, they done this out of pressure from Jewish Zionists, Jewish supremacists. Okay, inshallah, we will conclude there as the Q&A doesn't seem to be so engaging. And I will be seeing you soon. Have a good Ramadan and do dua for the safety of the people of the world, the innocent children of the world, from such groups and governments that endanger our children of other people, as well as the evil of the Zionist supremacist globalists that undermine real freedoms and cause schism. They are schismatics. They cause schism within societies. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a peaceful Ramadan, because these shayateen, they always engage and ignite a new war in Ramadan. My last live stream was with regard to Iran and the pending war in Iran. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to safeguard the people of Iran and the people of the rest of the world and the people of Palestine and the people of all the nations of the world. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.